Now here's the US workhorse covert action set. This is the OSS set, and the nomenclature is SSTR1. Incidentally, there's a fellow by the name of Gary Kane. I don't know, Gary, are you here today by any chance? No. Well, Gary got a hold of the 16mm training film for the SSTR1 and put it on video. And I suspect it's still available from him. So if you're really interested in this radio, the training film is available. Now, this is the receiver over here, and this is the transmitter, and it's a crystal, and there's the power supply. Now, if you wanted longer range, there was a power amplifier, SST-103, which had an 815 tube in it, which could get you out at, maybe 25 or 30 or 40 watts or something like that. But again, there's a downside to using too much power if you're out in the field. It makes it much easier for direction finders to work on you, and it makes it much easier to get triangulated and then strangulated because they'll catch you. And so, the use of a lot of power is not necessarily a good idea. But on the other hand, if you say, in a jungle in Burma, yeah, you've got that problem, but you also have to get out. And you're not talking necessarily 150 miles anymore. You may be talking 500, 600, 700, 800 miles or more, or maybe even back to India. And so there certainly were instances when higher power was entirely appropriate in these sets. Now this is an interesting radio because the company that did it was so busy with other projects that they said they couldn't do it. But there was an RCA engineer, I think his name was Hurd, H-U-R-D, who worked for the company, and at that point was a major in the Signal Corps. And he said, look, I'll do it at home. And he did. So he designed the entire thing at home at night and put it together and basically brought it in ready to be built. And that's how it came about. Now we'll get to this, but this is from Peter McCollum's site. Now this is a somewhat more advanced, although curiously enough earlier in design. And so this is the OSS AN-PRC-5. And I think PRC stands for something like personal radio. I don't remember exactly that nomenclature. Maybe somebody can help me out on that. But there was a PRC-1 and a PRC-4 and a PRC-5. Now, this is in a little suitcase, briefcase configuration. And again, we've got the meter, we've got the coil. Here's a Signal Corps stamp on it. But I had thought incorrectly that this was, designed about 1943 and put into the field about 1944, and I was wrong. It turns out that this radio was actually designed for the Forest Service in 1937. This was a little radio to go out in the woods with, and it got converted to military use, to spy use, and covert action use. But it's a very handsome set, and there are a few of these around also. There was another one which I think was the PRC-4 it might have been. But anyway, they didn't get built by the end of the Second World War, but they were ready to get built, and so they were sold as kits. And sometimes if you look in the ads in 1946, 1947, you'll see ads for the so-called Lucy receiver. And it's a kit that you could build. And what happened is somebody bought the stock from the company, the parts and everything, and you could buy this thing and build your own spy receiver. So if you see one of those Lucy radios around, it was actually going to be the advanced generation World War II spy receiver. It just never, the war ended too soon for it to be put into production. I've never actually seen one of those Lucy kits, but it certainly would be an interesting thing to take a look at. Yeah, here it is in its little secret clandestine case. Convenient schematic here in case you want to work on it. I think a lot of the guys in the field, even though they were radio operators, but amateur radio operators themselves and were trained radio operators, weren't necessarily technically adept. But on the other hand, this is the kind of situation where You had every incentive in the world to maximize your technical adeptness, because this thing could save your life if need be. So this is the way they actually put it in the field, as far as I can tell. It actually had the schematic diagram on it. And this is not that different from the horsey-talkie that we were looking at, the SCR 511. If you actually look at the circuit, it's the same kind of transceiver circuit, although a little bit more power. Now, if you get interested in this, go to www.militaryradio.com/spyradio. And this is Peter McCollum's site, and that's his email. And most of the images I've just shown you come off of that site, although various people send him things at various times. And this is probably well, to my mind, one of the most interesting radio sites. There's also an English site called Army Radio, which has a nice essay by retired Lieutenant Colonel about spy radio. So if you just go to Google spy radios, all of the sites are there, and they're very, very interesting sites. Now here's what the CIA essentially put together after the Second World War, and it was called the RS-1. It was also designed for special forces use. But this was particularly in the 1950s. We'll go through this a little bit, but in any event, there's the receiver, the transmitter, and the power supply. So there's a standard configuration. It's very small. It fits in a suitcase or a little box, and you can do a number of things with it. You can carry it around in a canvas bag, or you can put it in the equivalent of watertight ammo cans and bury it. And we'll get back to that. So here's the transmitter. This is from my friend Dennis Monticelli's collection. And so there's your tuning chart. And it's pretty basic spy radio stuff here. All right, let's go next. And here's the power tube again. So here's the inside. So again, this is putting out somewhere between 8 and 15 watts. And there's the underside. Again, the transmitter. And again, this is the inside from the other angle. Now here's the receiver, RR2B. And it's, you'll see it's as small as it can be at the time for late 1940s, early 1950s operation. Here's a crystal, by the way. Now, if you look in this year's AWA review, I've got an article on Swan Island, the CIA on the Swan Island, and that sort of thing. But I've also put a little appendix together that have some of these photos of the RS-1, because this was the radio in 1954 that the CIA gave to the so-called Guatemalan insurgents who were overthrowing Colonel Arbenz at the behest of United Fruit. Although that's a long story, and I urge you to read the article. But the subtitle is The Revenge of United Fruit. But this was actually the radio that was put into the field by the CIA for insurgents in various places at various times. Now here, this is the receiver, and now we have the miniature tubes. Most of the spy radios we looked at before had the octal or equivalent tubes in them, metal octal tubes, or the equivalent, on the German side, for example. But now we're back to, in a sense, back to the future. These are the same kind of tubes that were used in the 1937 horsey-talkie. Although it's a different tube, but it's not the 1S4 and things like that. But it's the same configuration. These are the pins through the glass, and that's a highly stable, reliable configuration. The pins through the glass that you see in these miniature tubes. And so this is what the receiver is using. And you can see, and I don't have the circuit in mind, but you can see that these are gang capacitors, and this is a superheterodyne as far as I know, but it looks like it's got an RF stage on it. I'll have to check and see if this is a TRF, but I think it's a superhet. This is another view of the receiver here.